The moment my brother-in-law walked through the door of that restaurant, I felt my stomach drop straight through the floor. Not because I was surprised. That's the worst part. I wasn't surprised at all. I was just sitting there at the head of the table, watching my sister's face light up with this nervous, apologetic smile. And I thought, here we go. Again. Let me back up, because if I start at that moment, you're not going to understand why it hit me the way it did. Why my hands were shaking under the tablecloth. Why I had to press my palms flat against my thighs and breathe through my nose just to stay present in my own body. My name is not important. What's important is that I am 31 years old. I have been working in corporate accounting for 7 years, and I had just been promoted to senior financial analyst at my firm. A real promotion. The kind with a title change, a salary bump, and, for the first time in my adult life, a bonus that actually meant something. My manager had given the whole team Friday afternoon off. He said, "Take your people out, celebrate, you earn this." And I wanted to. I wanted to do something that felt like the moment deserved. So I made a reservation at a restaurant downtown, the kind of place you have to book 3 weeks out, where the bread comes warm and the lighting is soft and everything on the menu is listed without a dollar sign because the dollar sign would be considered rude. I reserved a private table for 6. I invited my parents, my older sister, and 2 of my closest friends from college who happened to be in town. That was the plan. 6 people, my people. I had even pre-selected a set menu, talked to the event coordinator, put down a credit card to hold the space. This was not a casual dinner. This was something I had thought about, saved toward, and wanted to be exactly right. My brother-in-law was not on the list. My brother-in-law, I'll call him what he is because I'm not going to dress it up, is the kind of person who has never in his adult life paid for something he could get someone else to pay for instead. He is 38 years old. He has a marketing degree he has never used. He has cycled through 4 business ideas in the last 6 years, each one funded in part by my sister, each one dissolving quietly after about 8 months. He is charming in the way that people who don't have to work very hard to get things tend to be charming. Easy laugh, good eye contact, the kind of guy who makes you feel like you're the most interesting person in the room right up until the check arrives. My sister has been married to him for 4 years. I have watched, during those 4 years, as her savings account quietly hollowed out, as she started saying things like, "We're just being careful right now," when we'd invite her to things. As the version of my sister I grew up with, sharp, funny, quietly ambitious, got smaller and smaller. I had not said anything. That is my own failure, and I own it. I told myself it wasn't my place. I told myself she wasn't adult. I told myself it was complicated. But that night was supposed to be mine, just mine. He walked in at 7:14, when we were already seated and midway through our first round of drinks. He wasn't alone. He had 2 men with him that I had never seen in my life, both of them in blazers that were slightly too shiny, the kind of guys who laugh a little too loud and call the waiter buddy. My brother-in-law walked in like he had made the reservation himself. He pulled out the chair directly across from me, the one I had designated for my college friend who was, at that moment, actually sitting there, and just kind of gestured for him to scoot over, like rearranging the table was the most natural thing in the world. "Hope you don't mind," he said, looking directly at me with that easy smile. "Your sister said this place was incredible. I've been wanting to try it for months. Figure tonight was as good a night as any." I looked at my sister. She was looking at the menu. My mother touched my hand under the table. I said nothing. In that moment, I said nothing, and I hate that about myself. I sat there and I watched him pull out the chair and settle in and drape his arm across the back of my sister's chair like he'd been there the whole time, and I went somewhere else in my head. That place you go when you're trying to decide how much of a scene is too much of a scene. His friends introduced themselves. I can't even tell you their names now because I was barely there. I smiled. I think I nodded. I picked up my water glass and took a long, slow sip and thought about all the times I had let things slide because making it a moment felt like more trouble than it was worth. The menus came. My brother-in-law opened his without looking at prices. You could tell by the speed, by the complete absence of any pause. He turned to one of his friends and said, loudly enough for the table to hear, that the Wagyu here was supposed to be exceptional. He asked the server if they still had the reserve wine list. Not the regular wine list, the reserve one. The server looked at me, not him, me, because my name was on the reservation. I said yes, and I do not know why I said yes, except that I was still in that soft, frozen place where your mouth makes decisions your brain hasn't approved yet. He ordered a bottle, not a glass, a bottle, and not just any bottle, a 2017 Opus 1 Cabernet that, if I remembered correctly from having glanced at that list exactly once when I'd toured the restaurant beforehand, was listed at $480. I watched the server write it down. My brother-in-law's friend ordered a bone-in ribeye and a shrimp cocktail. The other one ordered the tasting menu, which was the most expensive fixed option, the one designed for the table to share but which he had just ordered for himself. And I sat there doing math in my head that I really did not want to be doing at my own celebration dinner. I excused myself. I told the table I was going to use the restroom, which was partially true. I did go to the restroom. I stood in front of the mirror with both hands gripping the edge of the sink, and I looked at my own face and I said out loud to my reflection, no, not tonight. Because here is what my brother-in-law did not know. Here is the thing that I had never told my sister, had never told anyone, because I was still deciding what to do with it. 8 months earlier, he had borrowed $400 from me. Not a loan with any formal agreement, just a text message, a quick, I'm in a tight spot just until the 15th, and I had sent it because he was family and because he asked and because I was still operating under the assumption that family asking meant family would repay. He never mentioned it again. I brought it up once, gently, and he said, oh yeah, totally, I'll sort that out next week, and then nothing. Not another word. $400. Gone. But that wasn't even the part that made my hands grip that sink. The part that made my hands grip that sink was what I had found out 3 weeks before that dinner. My sister and I share a streaming account, which means we share login credentials for an email address we set up together years ago. It's a family account. Parents, her, me. A few months ago, I noticed a charge on my credit card for a service I didn't recognize. I went into the shared email to check if it was something tied to our account, and while I was there, I saw something I wasn't looking for. An email chain between my brother-in-law and my sister, on my sister's account, which I should not have been able to see except that at some point she had synced it to the shared inbox by accident, and apparently never noticed. I am not proud of what I did next. I read it. I told myself I read 3 lines and stopped. That's not entirely true. I read enough to understand the shape of what was happening, which was that my brother-in-law had, over the course of about 4 months, been running a side business, and I use that term loosely, in which he was selling consulting packages to small local companies, packages for which he was collecting payment, and then not delivering. At least 2 of the companies had sent demand letters. He had shown my sister the letters and told her they were baseless, that these were just difficult clients, that it would blow over. She was stressed. You could see it in her replies. She was covering it. She had pulled $1,200 from her emergency fund to help him respond to one of the letters through a guy he knew who wasn't exactly a real attorney. $1,200 from her emergency fund for a problem she didn't create. I stood in that bathroom and I thought about my sister's face at that table, looking at her menu instead of looking at me when her husband walked in uninvited. I thought about the version of her I grew up with. I thought about $400 and $1,200 and a bottle of Opus 1 that was going to appear on a bill that he clearly planned for me to absorb. I went back to the table. I sat down. I unfolded my napkin into my lap with both hands, slowly, like I was doing something deliberate. And then I caught the eye of our server, a young woman who had been attentive and patient and who had, I noticed, been quietly managing the chaos of 3 extra guests with grace. I said, quietly, that when the bill came, I'd need it split. My original reservation, 6 people, the set menu, on 1 check. everything ordered by the additional guests on a separate check. She nodded like this was the most normal thing she'd heard all night. Maybe it was. Dinner proceeded. I ate my food. I talked to my parents. I talked to my college friends. I let the ambient noise of my brother-in-law's table-wide performance wash over me without attaching to it. He was holding court, explaining to no one in particular his thoughts on the current real estate market, even though, as far as I knew, he owned no real estate. One of his friends had ordered a dessert flight. The other one asked if they could get a second bottle, and my brother-in-law said with a wave of his hand, sure, why not, and ordered a different one, the 2019 Ridge Montebello, which I clocked at $360. I did not say a word. I let him order it. I let the whole dinner play out. When the server came with the bill, she came with 2 folios. She set the larger one near the center of the table where the additional guests were sitting, and she set the smaller one in front of me. My brother-in-law looked at the 2 folders. Then he looked at me. "What's this?" he said. "Separate checks," I said. "Your food and drinks on yours. Mine and my guests on mine." There was a pause. The kind of pause that has a texture to it. He laughed. Not a real laugh. That social lubricant laugh people use when they're trying to make something seem smaller than it is. "Come on," he said. "It's your big night. Just put it together. I'll sort you out later." I looked at him for a moment. I thought about $400. I thought about $1,200 from my sister's emergency fund. I thought about I'll sort that out next week, and the silence that came after it. "It's already split," I said. "The server took care of it." His friends shifted in their seats. My mother was very still. My sister looked up from the table for the first time in about an hour. My brother-in-law opened his folio. I watched his face as he looked at the number. He closed it again. "I don't have the card with me that I was planning to use," he said. "That's okay," I said. "They take most major cards." He tried another angle. He leaned toward my sister and said, quietly but not quietly enough, that she should just cover it and he'd pay her back at home. My sister looked at him. She looked at me. And then she did something I had not expected, and I think it surprised her too. She said, "I don't have room on my card right now." He looked around the table. His friends were studying their napkins. Neither of them made a move. He put a card down. The server came back. She returned the card with the folio. His face didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. "Declined," he said very quietly. "Do you have another one?" the server asked, with professional gentleness. He had 2 more. The second one also came back declined. The third one, and this is the moment I will probably think about for a long time. The third one he held in his hand for a second before handing over, like he was calculating something, like maybe the math would be different this time just because he wanted it to be. It came back declined. The table was very quiet. I reached into my bag. I put my personal card on top of his folio. I looked at him and I said, and I kept my voice completely even, "I'll cover this one time, and then you and I are going to have a conversation, not tonight, but soon." He started to say something. I don't remember what. Something that started with "look." "Not tonight," I said again. "Go home." His friends left quickly, the kind of quick that tells you they knew exactly where they were and had been waiting for an exit. My brother-in-law followed them. He didn't say goodbye to my parents. He didn't say goodbye to me. He put his hand briefly on my sister's shoulder as he passed, more of a press than a touch, and then he was gone. My sister sat for a moment after he left. Then she said, very quietly, that she was sorry, and I could hear that she meant it in more ways than the word was big enough to hold. I told her we'd talk later. I meant that too. The rest of the dinner was quieter. But it was also more itself, if that makes sense. My parents relaxed. My friends relaxed. Someone ordered a dessert, a real one, a celebratory one, and we ate it slowly and talked about things that had nothing to do with what had just happened. But here's the part I haven't gotten to yet. The conversation I said was coming. 2 weeks later, I sat down with my brother-in-law. My sister was there. I had asked her to be there because this was not a conversation I was willing to have without her present, and because I think on some level she needed to hear it too. I told them what I knew about the demand letters, about the $1,200 from her emergency fund, about the $400 he had borrowed from me and never returned. I was calm about it. I had practiced being calm about it. I had written down what I needed to say in a notebook the night before so I wouldn't get pulled off track. He denied the demand letters at first. Then I told him I had seen the email chain, and I watched the calculation happen behind his eyes, the weighing of whether to keep denying or to shift strategies. He shifted. He said it was complicated. He said I didn't understand the full picture. He said that my sister knew everything and was fine with it. My sister, sitting next to him, did not confirm that. I told him that I would be covering what he owed me out of the money I had put on his restaurant bill, which meant the one time I had covered was actually the last time. I told my sister directly, not him, that if she ever wanted to talk about anything, I was there. Not to tell her what to do, just to be there. And then I said the thing I had been turning over for weeks, trying to find the right words for. I said, I love you, both of you, but I will not be a soft place for someone else's bad decisions to land anymore. That's not love. That's just a different shape of the same problem. He left the table to get some air and never came back in. My sister and I sat at her kitchen table for another hour. We didn't resolve anything that day. Some things don't resolve in an hour. But something shifted. Something that had been locked got, if not opened, at least moved. She called me 2 weeks after that. Not about him. Just to talk. About her job. About a book she'd been reading. About something funny our mom had said. The normal things. The things we used to talk about before his version of their life became the only subject available. I don't know what happens next for them. That's not my story to tell or control. What I know is that I sat at my own celebration dinner and I paid for my own celebration dinner, and for the first time in longer than I want to admit, I did not absorb something that wasn't mine to carry. It cost me $480 to cover his wine, and every single penny of it was worth it for what happened after. If you have someone in your life who has been treating your generosity like an infrastructure they didn't have to build, and you know who I'm talking about because you felt something when I said it, I want you to hear this. Separate checks is not a punishment. It is not cruelty. It is not making a scene. It is just the truth made visible. And sometimes the truth made visible is the only thing with enough weight to change anything at all. I keep coming back to the moment my sister said she didn't have room on her card. Not because it was dramatic. In the scale of everything that happened that night, it was a small thing, a quiet sentence said to her lap more than to anyone at the table. But it was the first honest thing she had said out loud in a room with other people in a very long time, and I think some part of her knew it. There's a version of that night where I say nothing, where I absorb the wine bill and the extra guests and the rearranged chairs and the performance my brother-in-law puts on for his friends, and I go home and I lie in bed staring at the ceiling, calculating what it cost me, and I tell myself it was easier this way. I have lived inside that version of events before. I know exactly how it feels. It feels like relief in the moment and rot in the morning. What I've learned, not from one night, but from the slow accumulation of every time I've said yes when I meant no, is that generosity without honesty isn't generosity at all. It's just fear wearing a generous face. Fear of conflict. Fear of being seen as difficult. Fear that if you draw a line, the people you love will choose the other side of it. My brother-in-law didn't order $840 worth of wine because he was reckless. He ordered it because every time before that, someone had paid for it. The behavior doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens because it's been taught, not in words, but in the soft, consistent language of being let off the hook. I was part of that system. I'm not proud of it, but I'm also not going to pretend otherwise. What took more from me than the money was the willingness to think clearly when it would have been so much easier not to. To go back to that table after standing in the bathroom with my hands on the sink, and to ask myself what I actually wanted to do. Not what was polite, Not what kept the peace, but what was true. That kind of thinking takes something out of you. It requires you to be honest about your own role in how things got this way. And then there's what it took to actually say it out loud. To look at him across a table in a quiet restaurant and say, "Not tonight." 2 words. 11 letters. The kind of sentence that is physically easy to produce and personally very hard to mean. I had to mean it. I had to mean it enough to sit with the silence that came after, to not fill it with an apology or a joke or a softer version of what I had just said. My sister called me a few weeks later, just to talk. That call meant more to me than anything that happened at the restaurant, because it told me something I hadn't been sure of, that the line I drew wasn't a wall. It was a door. A different kind of door than the one we'd been using, one that required both of us to show up differently, more honestly, more carefully, but a door nonetheless. I don't know what my brother-in-law does with any of this. That's not something I control. But my sister is still calling, and I am still answering. That feels like the right kind of ending,